Hey everyone, Jack here, coming to you from Indianapolis, Indiana. I just finished walking through a deal, this property right here, that I'm currently under contract for, and I'm set to close in the next couple weeks here at the end of July. And the reason you have this whole opportunity with real estate is to prevent buyer's remorse. So you get a couple weeks to take a look at the property and make sure that it is meeting your expectations and there aren't any surprises. Of course, you're never going to find everything because you can't rip down the walls, but you can take a look at all the major systems and make sure that it is what you think you're getting and that we are who they thought they were. Or they are who we thought they were. Yeah, that's right.
But they are who we thought they were.
So I actually want to go through this deal with you guys right now to show you why I think it's a pretty good deal and what I'm thinking about doing with this for the short to long term and kind of the whole plan around this rental property and really my overarching strategy in Indianapolis in general. But without further ado, let's get back to home base and actually go over this deal. All right, we're back home. It's actually been a few days since I filmed that intro. I went to Indianapolis last week to take a look at that property that I'm currently under contract for, and we are set to close at the end of next week, barring no disasters. But before I go into the details, if you guys are at all interested in real estate, investing, personal finance, and those sorts of topics, be sure to have a look around the channel, and if you like what you see, be sure to subscribe. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar, the reason I'm investing in Indianapolis, I actually live in Chicago, and Chicago is just generally a very expensive market, mainly because of property taxes, but also it's a very dense area. At least the nice areas of Chicago can get very expensive very quickly because that's where everyone wants to live in Chicago, because there's a lot of undesirable areas, unfortunately, mainly because of violent crime. And even worse, Chicago is actually shrinking in a lot of places, so for the long run, I don't want to have a ton of money parked here, at least all my money parked here, because that could lead to some bigger problems. I want to diversify myself geographically in addition to putting it in different asset classes. But Indianapolis is a much more cash flow oriented market compared to Chicago in many places, so you typically can get a higher rent yield at the moment, and it's growing, so it has those two things going for it. It tends to do well in recessions compared to a city like Chicago, which already has some bad things during the otherwise good times. So not that Indianapolis is a perfect city, but it has some things that I like right now since I'm really focusing on cash flow. I want to get to financial independence first rather than trying to build a giant net worth or something like that and then having all the money tied up in real estate, but it's not really paying me enough to actually get to financial independence quickly. I want something with a high yield to start so that I can get my financial independence, and then I can make financial decisions based on the finances themselves, not based off some sort of necessity and not having enough money to pay bills or something like that. Now, this deal is actually an off-market deal that was presented to me by the broker that I'm working with down in Indianapolis. She wanted to know if I was interested since I've been shopping for rental properties down there, and I said, all right, I'll give it a look, since the seller wanted to sell for $85,000, and it currently has a tenant in it paying $925 in rent, so already a pretty good rent yield. But when I actually looked into the rent and sales comparables, I could tell this was actually a better deal than it appeared at the beginning, because rents were actually over $100 below market rent. Really, market rent for this type of property could get anywhere from about $10.50 to $11.50 without a big issue because of other houses by it fetching those rents. So as long as it was kept in repair, you could get those sorts of rents. So already it's well below market rent at $925 right now. But also those same types of homes, this was a 4-bedroom, 2-bath in Indianapolis, but really it's more like a 5-bedroom. I'll get into that. But those were actually selling right now for about $100,000 to $110,000 or even $115,000 a piece. So not only is the sales price below at only $85,000 when it could potentially get $100,000, it also has rents that are well below market rents, which is probably why the seller doesn't feel as confident as taking it to market and trying to get $100,000. And I believe the seller also has some sort of financing contingency with another deal, and he wants to get the money out of this deal quickly. So when I presented him with a cash offer, I think he wanted to go with it pretty quickly. And I wasn't the first buyer of this property, so I think he is trying to get rid of it pretty quickly, or at least so it can line up with whatever his other obligations are. I'm not sure what they are exactly, but that's my understanding. But I actually wasn't the first buyer to make an offer and get under contract on this property, even though it's off market. So the former buyer actually backed out because he wasn't able to get a number of credits that he wanted from the seller. And I thought, well, that's a big red flag. I wonder what the former buyer actually wanted. So I asked to see the former buyer's inspection report, if the former buyer would be okay with giving it to me. Thankfully they were, so I could take a look pretty quickly at what the major issues were with this property, if there were any. And I came to the conclusion that it seemed like there was a lot of minor issues, but really no major issues. Major issues being roof, central air, plumbing, those sorts of things, electrical, that can get really, really expensive really quickly and don't really produce a big ROI. And it was mostly little things, which I'll get into in a second, but that had me thinking that there was actually some real room for profit here. Not to say that there weren't still major projects that needed to be done, they just weren't very expensive projects. They were important, but not super expensive and highly labor intensive. They were mostly quick, small jobs to take care of things. So I made an offer based on the buyer's initial inspection report, since I was much more comfortable without having actually seen the property, because I had this report that had plenty of pictures and plenty of diagnoses of the problems with this property. But that does not mean that I wasn't going to have an inspection done myself. However, I didn't really need a report since I technically made this an as-is sale, so I wouldn't need a report to back my claims against the seller. So I just could go in and walk it with an inspector and then take notes. It's actually a tip I picked up from Chandler David Smith's channel. I highly recommend checking out Chandler's channel if you have never seen it before. He's a much more experienced real estate investor than I am, and that's something that he often does. He'll have an inspector walk with him. He'll pay the inspector half of what the normal rate is, and then we'll just take notes with him so he has just another set of professional eyes with him as he walks through properties, and can actually use that as leverage still if he doesn't actually need a report, since the report takes a lot of time for an inspector to write up anyways. So I did the same thing. I used the inspector that I used on the couple deals that I've covered on this channel before that I eventually pulled out of, but I asked him if he would be okay with doing a half price inspection. He said he would, and then he wouldn't actually give me a report. I was just going to walk with him, confirm things that the other inspector claims to have seen, and also see if he missed anything by chance. When we walked the property, the big issue that the other inspector also pointed out was that the central furnace was actually leaking. So we weren't really sure what exactly was causing it, but clearly it needed some repairs. Thankfully, the seller actually is giving a credit to repair that HVAC. It's about $1,000 worth of repairs. The big problem is the condenser is leaking, and all that water is just going onto the floor in the garage, which is ridiculous since there's no drain there. So the big fix would be to, one, put a better condenser pump in there, but then have the pump go outside of the garage, somewhere outside. That's the plan. So the water will actually have somewhere to go rather than just going on the floor. And that was a very annoying problem. The other major sort of problem was the toilet in one of the two bathrooms was not working, and we weren't sure what the problem was exactly. The seller actually went through and repaired that toilet because there was some sort of supply line issue, but now it works fine and it's all good. We weren't sure if that was a sewer line issue because that's definitely a problem with some older properties. But this property is from the 60s, which is usually when they phased out a lot of galvanized plumbing and switched it to PVC or just much better plumbing that won't wear out super quickly like a lot of the 1920s and earlier plumbing is. So anyways, I actually still went ahead and had someone check out the sewer line just to be sure that there wasn't any issue or any sort of compromise. And he basically diagnosed the same thing. He said, no, the only problem here is the furnace is leaking. There's no leak coming from the sewer line, which was right next to the furnace, and we weren't too sure as the water was a little stinky, so we wanted to be extra safe going into this deal, knowing that there wasn't a big sewer line issue that was going to cost me $15,000 because a lot of the sewer line clearly ran under concrete in the driveway, and that's a very expensive repair. Thankfully, it doesn't seem like that's at all an issue, and it's just the furnace leaking, and we just had to fix that. Otherwise, there's some smaller, quirkier issues. There's a small hole in the roof next to the chimney that can easily be patched up. There's also a P-trap that needs to be added to the washer-dryer. There's also a weird thing with the house fan where it's actually not hooked up to anything, because I don't think there's actually anything that runs up there to hook up the house fan, which blows a lot of the air out of the main living area and into the attic and then outside. So that will need to be fixed. There's also some siding that's peeling in a couple spots, but nothing that's compromising the structure or causing leaks. But we'll definitely keep an eye on it, and I might do the repairs on those anyways, just to do some preventative maintenance if it's not time to just replace the siding soon anyways. One of the dumber issues of this property is that the water from the gutters actually drains right back into the side of the building. And for those of you who don't know, the whole point of gutters is to have the water get away from the building. So anything on the roof runs off into the gutters, and then the gutters deposit the water water somewhere else, at least a few yards from the property, so that the water doesn't get into the foundation and start wearing it down and moving the soil around. Water is not the friend of real estate. Water causes a lot of problems. When water gets in places it shouldn't go, it causes big damage, and then you have to repair things, and that's very expensive. But this should be an easy fix. You just move the gutter line underground somewhere, or even above ground if you wanted to be really cheap with it, and make it point away from the property so the water's not all feeding back into the side, since it's very dumb. There's also a missing step on the porch that can be, it's wood, so you can add to that. Otherwise, it's pretty sturdy. The back porch, or I should call it the deck, needs bolts to actually bolt it to the house to be up to code. That'll be pretty quick. Otherwise, there's some electrical work that needs to be done real quickly in the circuit breaker box, where there's a couple coupled wires into one circuit that should be split into two. So I'll have to bring out an electrician for a few $100 to split that back up and make it proper. So that's another small project. It's really just a lot of small projects. The kitchen's also kind of in disrepair when it comes to all the cabinetry, since it looks like it's kind of old and the tenant definitely hasn't taken very great care of it. Or I could be wrong. It could have been like that before this tenant came in, but they're missing a drawer. The hardware seems to be broken in a couple spots, but it's nothing too major. It's just cabinets. You can fix those pretty easily. The kitchen also needs GFCI outlets, which is another couple $100. Shouldn't be anything too major. These are very simple fixes for the most part that just take someone's time to do, so they'll cost some money, but it really shouldn't be too bad. One of the weird things that the initial buyer's inspection actually showed was that the fourth bedroom didn't have a closet, and that in order to be considered a bedroom, you would need a closet. But then actually, when we did the walkthrough, there's actually 5 bedrooms, and then one of those bedrooms doesn't have a closet. So it's actually properly listed as a 4-bedroom when it's being put up for rent, and the way it was advertised to me when it was being sold. So it is a 4-bedroom, and there's actually a 5th sort of bonus room that could be converted into an official bedroom with a closet, but that's just more flexibility for me, and that's something that the initial buyer's inspection failed to note. There's more value in actually walking the property yourself, or at least getting your own guys to walk through it so you can double check someone else's opinion. But anyways, that's about it for this actual deal. I want to get into the actual metrics and how to run the numbers on a property using my rental metrics calculator, which you guys can get in the description below. So let me go to that now. All right, so here we are on my computer. You can actually get this exact rental metrics template, and you could use it for yourself to analyze your own deals. If you go to my website at jackdeffley.com, there's a tab for free stuff. I'll also always include a link to all of the free stuff on my website in all of my video descriptions. So go ahead and find it there, and you just give me your email and I'll send it to you, and you get your free rental metrics calculator. But anyways, I'm going to show you how I would run the metrics on this deal. And first things first is to get your sales price in there. I'm buying it for $85,000. This is an off-market deal, and based on current comps in the area, this thing probably is worth about $100,000, if not more. So I'm going to put conservatively $100,000, and that's great. So that's already a $15,000 wedge, as Meet Kevin would call it, but that's $15,000 of equity upside that I get immediately for buying this deal, which is awesome. So I'm really pumped about that. And that gives you a little bit of a cushion when it comes to doing rehab, which is what I'll get into now. I already mentioned some of the projects that this thing needs, but here they are itemized. And again, these are very conservative numbers for as to how much these things are probably actually going to cost. I'd rather overestimate the cost than underestimate, since whenever you're projecting the rental metrics on a property, you want to be sure that you are going to overshoot rather than undershoot, because you'd hate to be short on cash or think that you're getting an amazing deal when you're actually getting a very sad deal. We don't like sad deals here, so here's what I'm looking at right now. So the bathroom vent, I would be jerry-rigging the bathroom vent to the light in there, since there's a lot of peeling on the ceiling, so that would be a few $100 at most, probably, and I'd be patching the roof in one certain spot. That probably wouldn't be that much either, but I'm just going to put it at $500 each. Now, the closet here, the 5th bedroom, that's not technically a bedroom because it doesn't have a closet. I could add a closet there, and I'm not sure that I actually want to do that. So that would be $1,500, but I'm going to kind of treat this almost like a variable expense, since I don't really have to do this, and I don't think I'm going to. At least not yet. If it makes sense to bump this thing up to 5 bedrooms rather than 4, I'll go ahead and do it. But I really don't think I'm going to see much more rental upside when it's 5 bedrooms, because 4 is already a lot, and for an affordable rental, typically I just would hate to have someone search this property as a 4-bedroom, or they're searching for 4 bedrooms in the area, and they miss this one because it's listed as a 5-bedroom because it's technically a 5-bed. And how many people actually need 5 bedrooms? It's pretty rare unless you have a very larger, or not very large, but you have a larger family, then it makes more sense. But 4 bedrooms should cover my bases, since 3 beds typically kind of dominate most rental markets. So 4 bedrooms should be enough. I don't think I really need to do this, but I'm going to leave it here because if I ever want to, it's already factored into my return and everything. Next, we have the gutter drain pipe, which would be burying that gutter drainage in the backyard, since it's pointing right back into the foundation, which is very stupid. So that would cost a couple $100, probably not 500, but I'm going to leave it at 500. Drain clog, that will cost a couple $100 as well. Again, conservatively 500. We'll add the P-trap in the washer. Probably, again, won't cost $500, but I'm just going to put it there. We'll add the deck bolts. We'll add the deck step. Siding, again, I don't know if I'm going to do a whole siding project right off the bat, but even I want to patch things up, since there's a few corners that are peeling, and they're just kind of ugly. They're not really compromising anything. There's no leaks, but just in case that becomes a larger issue, I'll put some off to the side right here. Dryer vent will be $100 maybe. Circuit box, this is probably overestimating what it's actually going to cost, just like everything else. The circuit box, again, we have the coupled wirings that need to be split up into separate circuits to be more up to code and also just safer, so that'll be good. And also be covering up some of the exposed wiring, so we'll say it costs about that. Now the drawers and really cabinets in the kitchen are pretty dingy right now, and there is a missing drawer, and I would prefer to replace that, though. When I went through the property, the tenant has the kitchen very messy. Most of the house is fine, but the kitchen is messy, and it would be a little awkward going in there to repair all the cabinets in the state that it's currently in, though I will eventually have to repair these at some point, but I think I'll at least put the drawer in right away. But I'm definitely anticipating repairing those in an eventual unit turn if and when we get one. And the other thing would be hooking up the house fan that's currently hooked up to nothing. That will cost a few $100. And then we have adding GFCIs in the kitchen mainly. That'll be a few $100 pop at most. That's probably overestimating it. But anyways, closing will have $1,500. I don't have a loan here, so my closing costs are very minimal, which is great. Now, if you had a loan, this would probably be much higher. I do include it on the mortgage tab, but I'm just separately line iteming it in the rehab section for this deal because they're going to be probably quite low compared to someone who was using a traditional mortgage up front. Then reserves, I'm putting these up front. This is the most important item in my opinion. Not only because it's the largest one, I think, if you add up everything else. Well, I guess this doesn't make up the majority, but it makes up the plurality easily. And these are very important, having reserves right off the bat. Because now if there's some project that pops up, I have cash ready to go. Because unlike these projects, these are going to an expense, and these are going to be spent. And they are going to go towards something. I'm not getting the cash back. Here with the reserves, this is going into an account, and I'm just leaving the cash there. I'm just adding it to my returns as an expense so that I don't end up affecting my returns later by having to contribute more money later. The money is already there ready to go, and I have security, and then I can focus on other deals as well because I know I have money parked here that's ready to go to cover emergencies. And if the tenant stops paying rent, which I'll get to that in a moment, but if the tenant stops paying rent for a while, or if there's some sort of eviction, or if there's a big expense that pops up, I have money to cover it, which is great. And every investor, whether you're using a ton of debt or not, you should have some reserves going into any deal. Now, if you have more debt, probably makes sense to have more reserves. Or if it's an older property that has some big capital expenditures coming up, be ready and get those reserves going early. So that's what this is here. So in total, we're looking at about $18,000 in rehab, and I put rehab in quotes, but it's really more like 10 grand at most if you don't include reserves, or really more like 8 grand if you remove closing as well. So that's kind of what we're looking at there. Now, I mentioned that there is a potential problem with the rent because apparently the current tenant hasn't paid their rent for July yet, and we're nearing the end of the month. And apparently this is linked heavily to the pandemic, so this could be a longer term issue if I'm to close and keep this tenant. And you can't evict this tenant anyways because of the eviction moratorium, and plus it'd be kind of cruel right off the bat during the middle of a pandemic pandemic, though they are getting a good deal on rent, so it'll depend on a lot of things. But what I'm trying to do with the seller is negotiate some sort of credit or some sort of insurance to try and mitigate that risk of having a tenant who might not be able to pay rent for a couple months if things are really, really bad for them and they can't get any rental assistance. But we'll see what happens there. I certainly wouldn't want to evict someone immediately after closing, not only because that would be messy, but also that's just kind of sad, since it doesn't seem like it's anything that they really did other than not having enough savings, I guess. But that's much more easily said than done. I'll definitely keep you posted on that either way. I hope we can keep this tenant and don't have to go through any nasty process like that, or we can cut some sort of deal. I don't know, but I hope that it doesn't get to that point. Thankfully, we haven't closed yet, so we can negotiate something with the seller as well to help mitigate some of that risk, like I said. So I'll keep you posted on that. On the income side, it's currently renting for $925 a month. Now, this definitely has room to grow, and I'll show you how that affects it later, but let's go to expenses over here, because this is tied to reserves. So here we have vacancy and capital expenditures. So in a single-family home, if the unit's renting, there's no vacancy. So what does this mean? Well, vacancy is preparing for the event that you have a vacant unit for a certain number of months per year. You're averaging it out while you're making money so that in the event that your unit goes vacant, you have cash ready to go and built up and you don't have to dip into your other reserves. It's basically just another type of reserve. So in this case, I would be taking $74 or 8% of the current month's rent and would be parking that into reserves just for vacancy. So in the event that this tenant leaves or there's a month where there's no rent coming in, I basically have some rent saved up, and that will cover expenses in the event that the property is vacant. So at 8%, 8% of the year is about a month a year. So I'm basically assuming that 1 month per year will be vacant, and I will have the money to cover that 1 month when that happens. And if it doesn't go vacant, then great. I just have more cash off to the side. It's really not a problem. So that's why this is here. Capital expenditures, almost the same thing. While you're making money, you're saving money for capital expenditures like the roof, the furnace, the AC unit, any wiring, all these big capital expenditures that are eventually going to come up. You got to have cash ready to go for those. So this I also have at 8%, which probably is a little low for an older properties from the 60s, but 8% is pretty reasonable. And the higher the rent goes, the higher this goes too. So it's not as though capital expenditures are always going to be 8% or 10%. There's no real hard and fast rule for capital expenditures since you only have one roof, for example. So if you have 5 units and they're really space efficient and the one roof doesn't need to take up 10% of the rent, then you're good there. So this can change. I'm using 8% for now, and I'll certainly learn how much work this property needs over the long haul in the long haul, and then I can adjust these accordingly. Then property management, this is also on the higher side. I currently have it listed at 13%, which the base fee for my property manager is going to be 10% of rent, which is a little bit on the higher side, but again, this is a lower, this is more of an affordable unit. We're not talking about luxury units here where 10% would be enormous. We're talking about 10% of $925, which is significant, but it's not as though this is like many thousands of dollars. So that is a base of 10%. They also charge fees for releasing the property or putting a new tenant in, and there's some other smaller fees mixed in. So I'll just ballpark it at about 13%, which is a little bit on the conservative side, but that will be going towards property management. This doesn't go to a reserve count, unfortunately, but it does go towards the property management expense. And then insurance for this property will be about $500 because it's not my homeowner's policy. This is a renter's policy, or it's a landlord policy. So it ends up being about the same price anyways, but it's $500 or so. That's the quote I got. And then legal expenses, this would be for maintaining the LLC and renewing it every couple of years in Indiana. That will be about $9 a month on average, maybe a little bit more for paying an attorney once in a while, but that is what this is. This is mostly upfront expenses. Then taxes on this property would be about $1,600 a year. It's probably closer to $1,500, but I would rather leave it on the upside as though it's going to be higher. And because it seems like property taxes always go up, all taxes seem to go up over the long term. So I'm leaving room there for property taxes to go up. But this is about what they're at right now. And then for the mortgage, this is a little weird in my situation because I'm using a HELOC as my debt. I'm not using a traditional mortgage attached to the property. This is a separate line of credit that I'm pulling from elsewhere. And the interest rate's also super low because of that. It's a 2.25% HELOC, and this can change. This rate can change, but I would hope to have this paid off before then. I'm on paper putting $45,000 in cash into this. And then that would mean the remaining cost and rehab and everything would have to be covered by this HELOC, which would be about 58 grand on paper. Though I could change the allocation between cash and not cash as I please, because I've had cash. I pulled all the cash out of my HELOC and have it sitting in a bank account right now. So, it's all on paper what cash I'm using versus what HELOC funds I'm using. But that's beside the point. I'm just pretending like I'm using all of my cash, and then keeping the HELOC draws as a separate account. So that's what my monthly payment would be, about $250, which is nice and low for 60 grand or so in debt. And when you put it all together, you're looking at about a 6% cash-on-cash return. Not very great, for sure, but remember, these rents are low. And then the ROI would be about 10% if you included principal paydown, which I am. So not too bad. I mean, this is an okay deal on it right now if you weren't to do anything else, but there's a couple things to point out here. Remember this $100,000 and $85,000 sales price, but it's worth 100 grand. That's 15 grand right off the bat. I'll add that in a bit, but first I want to show you how the rent increase will affect things. This thing could rent for $10.50 probably pretty easily, and $11.50 on a great day. And we're not in a great day right now, but that's really good because it's only renting for $9.25 right now. So at some point, rents will get up closer to $10.50. Now, let's say at the end of this tenant's lease, I bump it up $50 to $9.75, which is still a great deal. The tenant's still getting a great deal, and then I get a slight increase in return. Now we're looking at closer to 7% cash-on-cash return, and then over a 10% ROI. What if I did the same thing the next year and made it $10.25? Still getting a great deal, and now not quite as great, but now what's my return look like? Looks like we've got a 7.7 cash-on-cash. Looks like the income got cut off. 7.7 cash-on-cash, and then about 12% ROI. It just keeps going up. It's great. And this is not including any appreciation or any tax write-offs. This is all pre-tax stuff. And then let's say I actually get it up to $1,100 because the tenant leaves or something. Now we're looking at a 9% cash-on-cash, and then a 13% ROI. And if in the best case scenario I get $11.50, which is unlikely, I'd rather have it a little bit under the maximum rent just so you can get a better tenant. Or you have more choice in picking a tenant. That's 10% cash-on-cash, 14% ROI. That's pretty nice. So this is kind of the best case scenario. So let's put it back to where it is, $9.25. But now I'm going to include the appreciation from the first year. So if we're just looking at the first year, it's going to look something like this. So I'll add in plus 100,000 minus the sales price. So that's my equity, basically, that I get right off the bat. Now it looks like all of a sudden I made 43% on my money at the end of the first year, which is pretty nice if you include the 15% on paper wealth gain that I get because of the sales price versus the actual after repaired value. So that's great. So, I mean, basically, if you take the equity gain that I'm getting right off the bat, it kind of cancels out a lot of this rehab cost over here. 15 grand on this is as though I'm getting a free rehab, basically, if you want to look at it that way. And I cover almost all my reserves with that equity gain. And again, it might be higher than 100,000. I'm just assuming it might. I'm just putting $100,000 here because there's definitely a large chance that the market throughout the U.S. goes down. Indianapolis might be okay. That's what this property is, and Indianapolis has been growing. So unless it stops growing, which it could, maybe there will be a short-term dip, but I can't see it long-term being a super huge dip unless we have some really cataclysmic change, which again could happen. You never know, but I'm just going to assume for my purposes that it's worth about 100 grand. I could sell it for more maybe right off the bat, but I wouldn't be making much since most of these rehab items are more handyman type expenses rather than true value add things. But that's what the wedge is for. It covers that, which is good. But if you don't include that, then it ends up being about the 10% if you were just to leave it where it is right now with the below market rents. But I would plan on adding to that as we move through this lease and renew the next one, and especially if we get a new tenant entirely, we'll definitely bump rents quite a bit. I obviously don't want to, just be a jerk to this current tenant because they've lived there for over a year now and they just renewed and they're set to go all the way to February. So, and as long as they can keep paying, I'd be happy with keeping them in there and not having to do a turn. But I will want to do a slight rent bump at least up to the $9.75. So that's kind of where I'm thinking there. But again, if you want to use this rental metrics calculator, go ahead and check out the description below. There's a link to it. You can go ahead and get a free version of this for yourself, and then you can obviously adjust it if you want to get different metrics in there. But this is a good bare bones, and it does have a mortgage amortization schedule in there too, if you want to see how much principal pay down you got in there. So I don't want to call it super bare bones, but definitely a good basic rental metrics calculator. Very, I hope, easy to understand. If you guys want to see something else on this calculator, definitely let me know. I can always adjust it. So that, again, can be found in the description below or at my website at jackduffley.com. So it's not a fantastic deal, but I think it's a pretty decent deal, and I think a very solid deal for my first one, because most importantly, I'd be making a couple $100 in cash flow each month based on my current debt and expenses and everything, and that's great. That's extra security for Emily Ann, my wife, and I, so that we have more money coming in than we did before. And even if it's not the best investment in the world, even if there's a great one that comes on the market the day after I close and I don't have enough money for it, we still have a deal under our belts. And sure, there might be some problems to navigate, but that is part of being a real estate investor. You're going to have problems to get through, and this will be a great learning experience. And well, hopefully I don't need to learn a lot, right? That this project just goes completely smoothly and there's no problems, but I'm not expecting that. I'm expecting problems to show up and to continue to show up, and that I'll have to find a way to get through them. And when I get through those, I'll become a better landlord, better investor, and then ultimately be that much closer to financial freedom. But otherwise, that's all I've got for today. I hope you guys liked this more detailed breakdown of how to actually analyze a rental property. If you liked it, please give it a like, since it helps the channel out a lot. And if you like this sort of content, be sure to subscribe as well, since I put out new content every single week. If you guys actually want that free rental metrics calculator, definitely go in the description below and you can get it there, and then you can actually run the numbers on a property yourself. And you can also adjust that metric sheet if you want to add certain metrics to it, or if you want to change something based on the type of debt you're using or whatever it happens to be. But while you're in the description, take a look at the free stock brokerages I have down there: M1 Finance, Robinhood, and Webull. Robinhood and Webull actually will give you free stocks for opening accounts with them if you don't have them already, so definitely check out those. But until next time, take care.